From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Architecture can provoke a powerful emotional response. Think about a time you've stopped on a sidewalk to stare up in wonder at a massive skyscraper, or stepped inside a beautiful building and felt a sense of peace or inspiration. But the reaction to a building isn't always positive, particularly for people who have experienced trauma. Buildings that resemble schools, hospitals, or jails can make a person feel helpless or anxious. A relatively new movement in architecture is taking this into account. Trauma-informed design incorporates elements that help people feel welcome and safe. And it's a key component in a new youth shelter that opened last week in Denver. The Urban Peak Mothership, as it's called, is designed to help heal and empower young people experiencing homelessness. Chad Holtzinger is the founder of Shopworks Architecture. They're the firm behind the innovative design of the new facility, and he joins me now to explain more. Chad, welcome to In The NoCo.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I want to start with some of the basics. Could you briefly tell us about some of the principles of trauma-informed architecture?
Trauma-informed architecture is designing with the end user in mind and trying to design through their lived experience. And in the case of the Urban Peak Shelter, trying to imagine what it's like to be a youth experiencing homelessness, seeking help, and entering into a building, entering into a institution or a community without support, and trying to figure out how the environment can make that feel safe and welcoming, especially when you're in a state of fear or anxiety and uncertainty about your future.
Chad, I know your firm specializes in civic projects, things like affordable housing. You have a lot of clients that are nonprofit agencies like Urban Peak that work with vulnerable populations. I'm curious what drew you into this area of architecture instead of, building hotels or skyscrapers.
We founded Shopworks in 2013, and the idea was to really use our professional abilities to serve those in our community. And at the time, we really didn't know what that meant. The kind of underpinning of it was, let's focus on affordable housing. Mm-hmm. But in the realm of affordable housing, there is considerable amount of overlap with nonprofit agencies who both place people in housing, work with individuals in housing, and advocate for people experiencing housing insecurity. By connecting with those agencies, we really just saw this need for more than inventory. Housing inventory is great, and it does work to solve housing problems, but architecture can do harm. And a lot of times it's easy to get caught up in numbers instead of saying, well, what we really need is dignified housing that supports an individual's identity, a sense of self-worth, does not provoke anxieties like the principal's office or that time I was in jail, and instead says that this is safe. It promotes connection with others and community.
Right. So instead of just thinking about hundreds of tiny little box-like homes that all look the same, you are actually thinking about something that feels invigorating and supportive.
Exactly. And contextual, like the projects we do in Denver don't feel like the projects we do in Fort Collins, for instance.
And how did you begin working with trauma-informed design?
Our first exposure to trauma-informed design came from a shelter we did called the Dolores Project, which serves women and transgender individuals in Denver. And an interior designer and I attended a training for trauma-informed care. And we left that training thinking, gosh, what was conspicuously missing is how an environment might serve to calm. And if you imagine somebody who's coming into shelter with a lot of anxiety and stress, and they don't know what they're going to eat today and where they're going to sleep tomorrow, their experience of a building can either provoke anxiety or can serve to calm. And so over time, we've really begun to think of buildings and architecture as a first responder. Meaning that if somebody's entering a building in a heightened state of anxiety, what are the ways that the building can serve to soothe and calm and heal that stress, as opposed to invite new kinds of anxiety and institutional kinds of ways?
Chad, it sounds like this kind of building design would benefit a lot of other facilities. I'm thinking about long-term care homes or memory care facilities. Some of them maybe already do incorporate these elements. But how do you know that trauma-informed design is effective?
Our firm has been studying long-term effects of trauma-informed design approaches for 6 or 7 years now. And so we've done some research along those lines and found that buildings that are designed and built with a trauma-informed framework really do have better health outcomes and better relationships to services like healthcare and relationships with law enforcement than buildings that are designed without that. And that gets back to the question of inventory over quality and that design intentionality. We found that to do trauma-informed buildings doesn't cost more money really, but it does take a little bit more time because it's really important at the beginning of the project to really learn who you're designing for and to learn how people experience space and to be a designer that's not conscientious and aware of those things can do harm over time and perpetuate both inequality, but also perpetuate kind of the systemic relationship to those institutions that are doing harm when we think we're doing good.
Well, I want to talk about the new Mothership campus. The building is designed for young people experiencing homelessness. What are some of the unique needs these people have that you're addressing with the building?
The obvious needs are shelter and connection and companionship, safety. But the real important revelations that we had along the journey to design this building was how do you create peer support and community, especially in a building that's designed to house over 175 kids? How do you create small communities of kids who can develop deep relationships and support one another in their journey into stability, into housing? The best part of the Mothership, and it took us 4 or 5 years to figure this out, is a concept called the neighborhoods. In the shelter, there's an emergency shelter so that kids have quick access to shelter and care. And once that's established, then they are sorted up into the neighborhoods. So even though there might be 150 kids in the building, your neighborhood might have, 15 or 20 kids. And so that deep relationships can be made, that everybody's name, start to build social accountability, social skills, cleaning skills, living with others kind of supports, and allow for those neighborhoods to foster the kinds of relationships that you might find in a family. Yeah. So the peer-to-peer aspect of that, I think, is really powerful and something that we're really looking forward to see in action in a couple of weeks once the shelter's up and running.
Chad Holsinger is the founder of Shopworks Architecture. Their latest project, Urban Peak's new youth shelter, just opened in Denver. Chad, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for your time.
Urban Peak's new youth shelter will begin welcoming residents in early to mid-August. You'll find more information in the show notes and at KUNC.org. And that's it for us today on In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.